Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Alexandra Palmer. I'm the Nora Yvonne Senior Curator in Global Fashion and Textiles, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the ROM sits on the ancestral lands of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation since time immemorial today. I'm delighted you could join us for today's program, which complements ROM's current exhibition, Noel Hamlin Lifers. The project was undertaken with the financial support of Environment and Climate Change Canada and generously supported by the Royal Ontario Museum's Exhibition Circle. Noel Hamlin's Lifers runs until February 19th, so if you haven't seen it, you have plenty of time. Today's program will feature two emerging fashion industry experts, Cleo Page and Alexandra Holgate, and we'll talk about how they view the fashion industry's responsibility towards society and the environment and their thoughts on the future of sustainable fashion. Both are graduates of the fourth year University of Toronto program that I teach on textiles, fashion, and climate change. And I teach this program because these are our future fashion leaders. These are the people who are going to help us, and they need to be engaged. We all engage in fashion daily, and it plays such an important part in our identities. It's been a huge driver of creativity historically and huge economy, and can connect, and it can also divide us. It's something everyone participates in, and it affects us all. Unpacking the issues around a sustainable and also a pleasurable fashion future that does not damage the earth and keeps carbon emissions down to 1.5 degrees to avoid cataclysmic climate change on the planet. And this is a science-based target based on the 2015 UN Paris Climate Agreement. So we agree on this, but it's difficult. And talking about the situation helps us make sense of what's going on and hopefully leads us towards a positive direction so we can all be careful stewards of the planet. And the ROM has a climate change program, as you can see here, and we're happy to hear from you all the time. I'll be hosting a conversation with the first portion with my guests, and then we'll open up the floor for discussions. So please use the Q&A feature in the, not the chat, for your questions, and we'll try to get them at the end. So welcome Cleo and Alex to the program. Could I like to introduce yourselves? Cleo was in my first cohort, and the first time I taught the class. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please, Cleo?
Sure. Hello, everyone, and thank you to Alexandra and the ROM for inviting me to speak today. My name's Cleo Page, and I would say my background really sits at the intersection of engineering and fashion. I graduated from the engineering science program at the University of Toronto, studying biomedical engineering. Following that, I went to LaSalle College in Montreal for technical apparel design, focused on designing outerwear. And over the past 2 years since then, I've worked at engineering startups in both Montreal and Boston, designing sustainable coatings and treatments for textiles in their chemical engineering teams.
Fantastic. Alex, let's hear from you. Tell us about you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Alexandra, for the introduction and opportunity to discuss these issues. My background is similar to Cleo's insofar as I have a background in physics and fashion and have done research in both areas concerning epistemic structures and sustainability. I also work as a freelance model and photographer and ran the sustainable dress rental business Studio Delang, which I'll talk to you more about in the next coming slides.
Thanks very much. So, Cleo, can you tell us, can both of you tell us your interest in the reuse of fashion and how this can help climate change and what you've done about it? Noel Hamlin's Lifers is based on reuse. It's based on secondhand life jackets. and that have sort of been dressed with salvaged clothes. So everything in the exhibition is salvaged, including the sort of wavy looking floor that is actually recycled denim.
Similar to Noelle Hamlin's exhibit, I am also very passionate about upcycling and repairing clothing, which I share some of my creations at my Instagram called Cleo Clothing. And not only does this extend the lives of the clothes that I have, but it's a great creative outlet for me. And I just love the challenge of deconstructing and repurposing clothing given a limited amount of material at my disposal. Plus, the resulting project is also functional and something that I'm proud to wear. So here's an example of something that I've made. This is a down vest made out of an old hiking blanket that I bought off of Facebook Marketplace. Yeah, and then for the next slide, I just wanted to share that I did start sewing during university and taught myself thanks to YouTube tutorials. And I just really started upcycling and thrifting clothing and turning them into outfits that I want to wear. So here are some examples of that. And I think also sharing that online also can encourage other people to upcycle and reuse their own clothes as well.
That's great. So Cleo, you took a course at LaSalle College after graduating and taking my class, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So she learned. Okay, and Alex, let's hear about you in secondhand.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the core things we are trying to accomplish with the work we do and reusing of secondhand is to reduce really the environmental impact associated with the fast fashion cycle, where you have garments that are often only worn for a few times before being ultimately discarded. And arguably, the height of this kind of culture is especially visible when it comes to formal events such as prom, where dresses are typically worn once and then stuffed away in the back of a closet until maybe they later get sold or thrown out. So you can see on the slide here, Studio DeLang was a company I created to help offset this type of consumerism. So the model was that it extended the active life of these dresses while not requiring any new resources to be used. So the dresses were sourced from girls who had these dresses sitting in the back of their closets, who could lend them out to make some passive income. And it was a great cost-effective and sustainable way for girls to rent a dress without having to shell out a lot of money to pay for ownership. And what made it different from other dress rental businesses is that I wasn't focused on providing necessarily the most expensive designer brand names, and it was a much more affordable solution for young people who don't have a lot to spend to achieve a look like this.
Alex, you
So,
started this when you were in university, right? And it came from your
yes,
kind of cohort of high school students,
yes,
and you were
exactly.
targeting the university people there, right? Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to go to the next slide, um, the idea was to keep it more of a local business. One of the biggest failing aspects of sustainable companies in the type of research I've done has to do a lot with scalability and wanting to take a sustainable brand to becoming a global enterprise. And the issue with this is that the more layers and infrastructure and the larger a company becomes, the more difficult it is to maintain a sustainable business practice. So really, it's about getting rid of the intermediaries and taking these local services. Again, these dresses came from girls like in the Toronto area. They could give me their dresses and I would bring them to places at the university, such as Hart House, which is on the screen here. So it was more easily accessible, and you get rid of other issues that you have with, for example, online businesses where to ship the clothing, there is an environmental cost with the emissions that it takes to just send clothes from one place to another.
And you also talked about dry cleaning and all that stuff, but
Yeah.
but it closed down because of COVID, right? I mean, this is what
Yeah.
happened to you. So
Yeah,
the
unfortunately,
legacy of COVID,
COVID did wipe out all of the formal events, so I had to close it down.
right? Um, so Cleo, what do you think are some of the, more interesting or hopeful new developments for sustainability in fashion? And tell us what you're doing, because you're actually doing something really interesting that's we need a bit of help understanding your science-based stuff, please. Thanks. Next slide.
Sure. Well, as someone who's interested in the science and technology surrounding fashion, I'm really excited by the new wave of materials that are coming in and being developed that are trying to improve on the typical like polyesters that most, or at least like 50% of clothes are made out of now. But before that, personally, from my work, I attempt to address two main problems. So one of them is that waterproof textiles contain PFCs. And when I say PFCs, this refers to perfluorinated compounds, which is a group of chemicals that are synthetic and aren't found in nature and typically don't break down. So if you think of other industries, they're typically found in pesticides and flame retardants and oil and waterproof
So
products.
these
But
when these things get chucked out, they start going into our landfill and through our water systems and stuff like that. Is that what you're saying?
yes, yes,
Mhm.
exactly. So if you think about the textile industry, the jackets, for example, that to make them and when we throw them out, that accumulates in wildlife and can disrupt hormones and a bunch of other things. But what my company has been doing is developing an alternative coating that you can apply to the surface that gives waterproofing, but doesn't contain these harmful chemicals. Next slide, please. The next problem that we're also trying to address is dyeing and coloring in the textile industry. So about 20% of all industrial water waste is coming from textile dyeing. So if you think of staggering facts or the fact that to dye one pair of jeans, that takes about 100 liters of fresh water to do so, and you multiply that by the actual like 6 billion jeans that are made each year, that creates a lot of water waste. So what I've been working on is a textile treatment that is this coating that reflects certain wavelengths of light corresponding to color. So this process is completely water-free. Yeah, next slide. I'd also like to mention that there are a lot of other innovations happening in this space, such as recycled polyesters that contribute to like a circularity model. There are a lot of bio-based leathers made out of really anything you can think of, mushrooms, mangoes, all that type of stuff. There are also carbon neutral fibers that are coming out where they're actually, carbon negative, where there's more CO2 going into the clothes than being emitted when you're making these fibers.
That's really promising.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And a lot of other plant-based alternatives that big brands are coming out made of seaweed or other things like that.
Yeah, fabulous stuff. That's great. Thank you for doing this. Um, Alex, what do you think are the sort of most important issues related to sustainability today? And what can we do about it from your sort of age, your generation level?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the main issues in the fashion industry is certainly the current linear model that's being used, where infinite growth is assumed with infinite resources, which, as we know, the world does not have. And not only do we have this, but we have this in conjunction with overproduction and fast fashion brands producing clothes that don't even necessarily make it to a store rack and end up going straight to the landfill. So there's really a problem on both sides of companies overproducing, but also with individuals overconsuming. So one of the things that we can do to fix this is by implementing what's called the circular economy, which you'll see the definition on screen. The circular economy minimizes waste and resource depletion by keeping products, materials, and resources in a continuous closed loop system. So this is really getting people to think about their clothing from the raw material stage to the end of life stage, and taking responsibility for what's happening to your clothing every step of the way during each life cycle. So the best way that people can do this is definitely in their everyday lives. So I'm not sure if you wanted to go.
Because one of the problems with sustainable fashion is it's so overwhelming. The problems are so big that we don't know what to do. And it's, it's a industrial structure where things are made and you're just one part of that. But in fact, we can all do something, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Eco-anxiety is certainly a huge issue for especially people in Gen Z, where we're constantly thinking about the future and the impacts of climate change and how that's going to impact our lives. And this can feel very overwhelming, especially when you have older generations telling us, you guys are all going to die of climate change. It's not the most empowering thing to hear. And
Right.
unfortunately, that kind of rhetoric definitely does take away a sense of power and agency and this feeling of hopelessness, like these problems are so large and unattainable to fix, which is not true. So if you want to go to the next slide, I'm happy to start talking about what people can do in their everyday lives, because of course, the circular economy can seem like something that larger businesses should be implementing, which they should be, but you can also enforce some of these habits in your daily lives. So the best way to do this is by thinking slow, and try to incorporate this into your daily life with smaller actions. So I have laid out a little list of 8 things to ask yourself before you purchase a new item of clothing. But something I do want to mention is that the goal with this presentation is not to shame you for when you do decide to purchase new items. It's about getting you to think more about what you're purchasing, how much you're going to use that item, and where ultimately it's going to end up. Because unfortunately, one of the issues we struggle with in today's society is that there is such an overload of information. So I don't expect you to remember any of these questions, but it's great if you do. But one of the ways that you can lead a more conscious lifestyle that requires little to no effort is by controlling the amount of information you are being exposed to. So that means following sustainable fashion accounts or de-influencers to simply expose yourself more consistently to these ideas and combat the culture of social media, fast fashion. And what I personally love about some of the de-influencer accounts I follow is, and not only do I feel like I have more control over what I'm consuming, but I enjoy getting reminders, especially around events like Black Friday, where something will pop up and ask me if I really need to make that impulse purchase. So it's really about the repetition of small daily actions.
I got a great ad from a company that said they were closed on Good Friday, and then they had this wonderful little video about, too many clothes and stuff. It was really great. There were no deals. You just don't shop.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. So yeah, I would encourage.
You've spoken also about bracketing, and maybe Cleo, feel free to jump in anywhere here. Can you just talk about that? Because that was really interesting.
Yeah,
You did on that.
absolutely. Um, so something else that I've talked about before with Alexandra is when you are purchasing items, again, not only is the issue that clothes are so cheap, you don't have to think twice before you buy them, but especially when it comes to purchasing from online brands, I know um, people have the concern of the clothing potentially not fitting. So what they do is this thing called bracketing, where they'll purchase a pair of jeans in 3 different sizes to try on at home, and then they send the other two back that don't fit them. And I know that may seem like a good way of making sure something fits, and that's obviously something that you forego when you do online shopping. But something that not a lot of people know about is when you send clothing back to a company, anywhere from 20 to 25% of those returns end up getting thrown out because it's easier, even if the item is brand new, for the company to toss them rather than invest in the labor to reprocess and put them back on the shelf.
There are some brands do charge restocking fees, which kind of mitigates that. And I know people don't like it, but maybe if we understood more what that's about, that might help.
Yeah, I think avoiding returns when you can really is the best thing to do at the end of the day, because even again, like I was saying, with the cost of shipping, you're going to have fossil fuel emissions when you're transporting anything back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Okay, really interesting. Um, Next slide, please. We're getting into some nitty-gritty here. So I want to talk about this, the waste. We know that secondhand clothing is a huge driver. We know that secondhand clothing is a huge market that's actually accelerating and rising in the fashion industry, from thredUP, Poshmark. Like, there's so many different levels and layers of these new secondhand clothing sites. But really, we have so much due to fast fashion and now ultra fast fashion brands such as Shein that make breathtaking amounts of product every day and restock on their online every day. So, but we have lots of new developments and interesting technology for tracking and understanding what's really going on with goods, so that if something is designed and the idea is we don't care where it goes and it 90% is going to end up in landfill, we can track that, and we know. And there's lots of calls for responsibility, for transparency, if not regenerative products, which is what Cleo was talking about. So with all this dumping, it's a massive problem from the global north to the global south, particularly, hugely unfair, hugely damaging. So what do you think is the role of the producer, of governments, of legislation? Are you deeply cynical about this? Do you think there's promising ways of doing it? And the image on the right on the slide is something about extended user responsibility, producer responsibility. And this is something that's like when you buy your rubber tires for your car, and we all know that rubber is very difficult, then you pay an upfront fee for the disposability of that. It's sort of like the 5 cents on the bottle if you have a recyclable bottle. Do you think ideas like this might work, or how do we tackle this and actually make it a bit more equitable and keep the stuff out of the fills? Big question.
Well, I think on the producer side, I think they really need to include waste and product afterlife and how they design and think about their supply chains and their business models, and including educating consumers on their impact as well. And I think on the government,
have stuff online that explains what they're doing, or what are you?
Yeah, like resources to educate the consumers on the impact of the waste, or for example, parts of their business. And also, I think governments should require public disclosure of information about working conditions and the waste that's being produced and the emissions, so that you can actually track the progress also to achieve targets, climate targets as well.
Right. So Canada has actually signed on and it's implemented as of this year, the Modern Slavery Act. But there's lots of issues with that. It's like, that's for Canada, but it's actually tracking it all through the supply chain. That's really difficult, but it's a start. It's good.
For sure.
Yeah, I completely agree with Cleo insofar as that with the producers and the companies, it begins with good design, so we can avoid having these textiles and materials even making it to the dump to begin with. And this is something I think even on an individual level, I wish people could take on more, especially when it comes to, Alexandra, as you mentioned, vintage and thrift shopping has become very popular, which is a great thing. But I think a trap that people tend to fall into is thinking that to be more environmentally conscious and mindful, I'm going to take the clothes that I no longer want anymore and donate them to a thrift store. Meanwhile, they have no idea that only 10% of what they donate actually makes it out onto the floor, and the rest of it gets sent to the global south for dumping. So it requires a lot of accountability from every single level for this to stop happening. And on the government side, I do think taxing overproduction is something that should be looked into more. I know the EU is currently forming policies to put more responsibility and accountability on the producers to get them to contribute to more costs when it comes to recycling and even separating textiles from other waste.
Yeah, and one of the problems, just so people understand with recycling, is that when you have a product that has a mixed, well, polyester may so-called degrade in 200 years, and that's virgin fossil fuel that's not renewable. So we're extracting resources from the earth and we're tossing them away, but we're actually stacking them up on the earth too. But other things that have mixed products in them, you can't extract the cotton part from the polyester part or something, so that whole thing becomes impossible. So recycled cotton, and they are doing things with PET bottles and recycling things, but you kind of have to have a uniform material. But Cleo, you probably know more about this than I do, so
I think an additional challenge too, if you think about recycling clothes, for example, a pair of jeans, there's also zippers and buttons and elastics, and all of that stuff as well ends up being cut out and thrown away, and then you can recycle the rest if it is, as you say, like a virgin, like only one type of textile. So there's a lot of work to be done.
No, and this exactly goes back to just starting with good design. So when it comes to that point where things need to be taken apart and recycled, it's making that process much easier. So companies have less of an excuse to say, oh, well, this is too much for us to invest in changing. And I think in that way, the fashion industry compared to other industries, and this is something that's important to note, is they don't have great implementation of what is called cascading power of use. So when you start with the original product, and whatever is left over and doesn't get used is able to be used for a secondary and then a third tertiary product. So this happens, like for example, in the food industry, unused products getting turned into dog food and cat food. And it's just something that's harder to achieve in the fashion industry because of exactly what we're discussing. It's more difficult when you have to break these products down, but someone has to do it.
Yeah, so I mean the idea about sharing information, sharing products, if you're making this but you don't want that part, maybe someone does want that part. So, you need to kind of connect all the webs and the dots, and it seems like we should be able to do this with all our technology, but the proprietary kind of idea that comes with fashion is, well, I have this product and my product's special, so I have to sort of keep it secret so you can't take it. And, it's obviously all about making money. But this idea of kind of sharing or commoning, or Sandra Neeson, an Canadian academic who lives in the Netherlands, calls this dumping and things like this sacrifice zones. So she's identified that we're producing excess, we're producing nasty products, whatever they are, we don't want them. But we've actually created on the planet these places that she calls sacrifice zones, which is a very interesting way of looking at it, I think, and of actually identifying that this is a place that we have created in our Anthropocene. We've made a place that is sort of like, if you think of kind of Dante's Inferno or something, that's the sort of hell, but that we've actually made it. It's really shocking, really. But we should be smart enough to do other things. So you've also spoken, Cleo, about interest in, and Alex, about this interesting technology about, we're talking about the bracketing and trying things on, but I think you mentioned a site that you sort of virtually try things on, and I think Alex, you
Yeah,
mentioned
absolutely.
that.
So there's a site called Desire, that's spelled DESYR, which I think is on a resources slide we have later, where people purchase the products, try them on, post photos, they post all their measurements and the reviews. So it's a consolidated website where you can see from other people who have already bought the product if you think it may fit you or not. Because I know that can be tricky, especially some sites, the more fast fashion-y sites, because they're producing so much, they tend to not have a comment section or a review section where people can leave their measurements and post whether or not they fit. So it's good to have it all in one place, and you can
Mhm.
search by brand, product, and whatnot.
There are some very good apps, and we're actually going to have a resources list that if you want to email us here at the ROM to programs, we can send it out, and all these things will be posted on the online version later, so you don't have to worry about scribbling things down your audience. Now I'd like to move to and thank you both very much, and I'm so happy that you both going on and doing things. Let's hear from the Q&A. Let's see what the audience has to say, and please dive in, either of you. One comment question from someone says, we all have high-end expensive clothes we bought for wedding celebration that sit in our wardrobes. Stores like Xtoggery, which is a Toronto recycling consignment store, put you through the mill to make you feel it's a useless exercise. What do you suggest to pass on high-end but seldom used clothes, shoes, bags? Like if if we can't take them to it's a problem if we're saying, there's too much secondhand, but we still have too many things. What do you think people can do?
Sorry, the question is how you can resell
If you have
designer
expensive
items?
clothes that you don't take to the consignment store, but then what can you do then? What are the places that are maybe good to give it to? I mean,
Mm.
I think it is hard because we're saying, secondhand, there's too many secondhand clothes, but I think the issue maybe is just putting them in circulation, back in circulation.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Um,
that is exactly part of the circular economy model, is you never want to take the clothing out of circulation, or when you do, you have an end plan for it, even if that looks like taking it to a textile recycling plant. And there are some fashion companies too that have take back programs where you can bring back your clothing and they'll make it into something new. But really, I think it's not just about keeping it in circularity, but keeping it locally in circularity as much as you can. So that would look like taking your clothes to clothing swaps, which I know is new for a lot of people, but we do have some great events in Toronto where you can bring a bin of clothes and swap them around.
and you can do it with your friends too and have quite a lot of fun. Um, yeah, it's amazing. It's really good.
Yeah.
Okay, another question about how can we encourage younger generations, Generation Alpha to 2010 to 24, into liking pre-loved, pre-worn clothes. I hadn't really thought that they wouldn't, because most children are forced to wear their brothers or sisters' used clothes or something. So maybe that's why they don't like them. What do you think about that? There.
I feel like honestly, education and just kind of trying to make them like rethink the way that consumption, like consuming clothes, um, happens, and kind of make them ask them the questions such as like the think slow slide of how are they going to use these clothes, like kind of the lifetime of them, and I don't know, I guess just kind of create a bigger like
Mhm.
um,
There might be some young, there might be some young influencers too out there who, maybe they should be the influencer, the sustainable influencer. That's an interesting question.
I would
I
say it's
think,
already becoming quite popular with thrifting and secondhand. It is the cool, trendy thing to do right now. But even when it's not, I think it's good to remember why we want to make these changes to begin with, because we live in a system that makes you feel rich while actually robbing you. Because you could spend little to nothing on clothes, but these clothes, like a t-shirt that's going to cost you $5, that's made out of polyester or whatnot, it's not going to last you as long as just putting in that initial investment for something that is going to last you for the rest of your life. So
Yeah, and
you
of
end up
course,
spending the same.
children grow out of their clothes very quickly. It's not even a question like physically they become very so there are lots of children's clothes around which are really fabulous actually. And there's a question here. What are your thoughts on large companies' initiatives to incorporate sustainable practices in production, such as Levi's Waterless campaign? She says she's seen a lot of marketing, but not a lot of details. And I think that's a very key point. Maybe Cleo, what do you think about that?
Sure. I mean, there's definitely a lot of greenwashing and campaigns coming out from big brands to um, show that they're doing work that's sustainable, but really it's not behind the scenes. So I think there's definitely a lot of NGOs such as Fashion Revolution and Fashion Takes Action that have toolkits and guidelines for consumers to educate themselves on what to look out for related to.
Yeah, and I would say as a consumer, we all have incredible power and we need to start using it and saying, okay, like I like your stuff, but I don't see this. Can you tell me about it? And, the more we demand and the less we buy, the more they will hand it over, I think. Um, a question here about does sustainability have a negative impact on those in developing countries and sweatshops? If we stop buying so much, are they out of work? This is a sort of classic argument, which always comes around if you forming trade unions, if you make new technologies, in the 18th century when they invented the mechanical loom. The weavers had a big strike when they wanted to import Indian cotton and people didn't want the silks. There was a big strike and people very upset when, jobs are threatened and it's there. We need to make shifts. There are some jobs, but hopefully there's new jobs. I don't know. What do you ladies think?
Yeah, so that is a great comment. But I don't think it costs anything at their expense to, at the very least, have more transparency and traceability. And this is one of the other things that I look into when I do my research is when these sustainability reports come out, what are they exactly using to measure and quantify their sustainable goals? Like what exactly is the scientific process that's involved? And as Cleo was saying, there really isn't that much. The fashion industry is full of greenwashing terms that lead people to think they are making sustainable choices when they're not. And really, the biggest issue is at the end of the day, we don't really know the full scale of the issue. And in order to make it better, you have to be able to quantify that first, which is not what's happening right now. And more so than that, which is like another serious problem that I don't think a lot of people realize, is when it comes to greenwashing, fashion brands are able to absolve themselves responsibility because they don't directly own the factories or employ the laborers. And that's why it's so difficult, because they're intentionally not owning factories in Indonesia or India and whatnot, because otherwise that hinders their ability when they produce their fashion sustainability reports to say, oh, like, look, we're doing really great sustainable things. Oh, that other factory that we contract, we don't own them, so we can't control what's going on there. And I think it's really about these industries like taking the blindfold off, because it is willful ignorance in order to be able to address sustainability. And that's the number one thing that I
That's,
don't think would
yeah.
cost
I mean,
labor.
that's the sort of nub of traceability is how, going through the entire chain, the entire system. So it sort of stops, if it stops at your border, that doesn't really count, you know. And we know about sweatshops, we know about Rana Plaza, we know about, you know, that producers will say, okay, well, I'll just take my product to this other factory and stuff like that. And there's, you know, lots of information about that. We're coming to a close now. And obviously, we have lots to talk about to solve the problems of the world, but we can do it if we talk about it. And I'd like to thank you both very much indeed for participating and for taking my class in the first place and for moving on in the world and working on this problem in the ways that you can. I'm sorry we haven't got to all your questions, but we'll try and answer them later. And thank you very much. And thank you, the audience, for coming. And don't forget to come and see Noel Hamlin, Lifers, and join us again for another conversation at the ROM. Bye.